The headlines are everywhere. India walks away from a major trade deal with the United States. But what really happened behind closed doors? Why would one of the world's fastest-growing economies step back from a potentially game-changing agreement with the world's largest economy? In this video, we're not just repeating the news, we're unpacking the real story. Because let's be honest, this isn't just about tariffs or trade paperwork. This decision speaks volumes about where global power is shifting, how India is redefining its place in the world, and what this means for businesses, governments, and ordinary people on both sides of the planet. If you think this is just another political move, think again. There's a deeper play happening here, and we're going to walk you through it. From behind-the-scenes negotiations to high-stakes diplomacy, from economic pressure points to strategic autonomy, everything is connected. And if you're wondering how this might impact global markets, foreign investment, tech supply chains, or even the rise of BRICS as a counterbalance to the West, then you're in the right place. This isn't just news, it's a turning point. So grab a coffee, stay with us till the end, because the full picture only starts to come together when you understand all the pieces. By the end of this video, you'll have a crystal clear view of why India walked away, what the US miscalculated, and how this could ripple through the global economy in the months to come. Let's get into it. To really understand why India walked away, we need to rewind a bit and look at how we got here. The US and India have been circling around a comprehensive trade deal for more than a decade. It's been this on-again, off-again relationship, full of potential, but constantly hitting roadblocks. And it's not like both countries don't want stronger economic ties. They do. In fact, bilateral trade between India and the US crossed over $190 billion in recent years, one of the fastest-growing economic partnerships globally. So what's the problem? It's complicated. India wants to protect its local industries, agriculture, pharma, data, e-commerce, and doesn't like being pushed into opening up too fast. The US, on the other hand, wants better access to Indian markets, stronger intellectual property protection, and more regulatory transparency. And both sides have been reluctant to fully bend. You're talking about two huge democracies, each with its own domestic pressures, political egos, and long-term strategic interests. It's not just economics, it's identity, leverage, and legacy. Add to that the US withdrawing India's preferential trade status back in 2019. That stung. India saw that as a signal that Washington wasn't treating the partnership as equal. Since then, trust has been shaky. Talks picked back up in the post-COVID landscape, especially as both nations started viewing China as a common concern. The Quad alliance grew stronger, defense partnerships expanded, and it looked like trade could follow. But every time they got close to a deal, something fell apart. Whether it was disagreements over digital trade rules, agricultural exports, or tariffs on tech and steel, compromise never stuck. And recently, behind closed doors, those same sticking points came up again. India didn't see the value in a deal that required it to give up too much without enough in return. Meanwhile, the US expected faster reforms and more openness. This long, winding history sets the stage for the dramatic walkout you're about to fully understand in this video. It's not just about what happened this week. It's about years of tension, ambition, and mismatched expectations finally reaching a breaking point. And as you'll see, that breaking point could reshape how India does business with the world going forward. To understand why India made the choice to walk away, you have to look at how the country views trade, not just as an economic transaction, but as a piece of its broader strategy for independence, security, and long-term growth. India isn't just negotiating deals anymore, it's asserting a position over the past decade, especially under the Modi government. There's been a clear shift. India doesn't want to be seen as just another big emerging market. It wants to be seen as a global power that plays by its own rules. That means not rushing into trade agreements that could weaken domestic industries or hand over too much control to outside players. India has been burned before by trade liberalization that hurt local farmers, small manufacturers, and homegrown tech startups. So now when India enters negotiations, it's doing so with a defensive and strategic mindset. The country wants fair trade, not just free trade, and that's a big difference. This is why you see India resisting pressure on things like agriculture subsidies, e-commerce data localization, or pharmaceutical patents. These are non-negotiables in New Delhi's eyes because they impact millions of livelihoods and India's ability to protect its digital economy and food security. And when other countries, including the US, push too hard on those issues, India sees it as a threat to its sovereignty. But make no mistake, this isn't isolationism. India does want global trade, it just wants it on terms that align with its long-term national interests. That's why it's strengthening ties with countries across the global south, joining BRICS initiatives, investing in its own digital infrastructure, and pushing for reforms in global institutions like the WTO. India's trade stance is about strategic autonomy, being able to say no when a deal doesn't serve its goals and yes when it's truly balanced. So when India walks away from a deal like this one with the US, it's not a retreat, it's a signal that the old model of negotiating with India is over. Going forward, if world powers want to do business with India, they're going to have to meet it on equal terms, and that changes the game for everyone. Now let's flip the lens and look at this from the American side. From Washington's point of view, the US sees India as a critical, strategic partner, both economically and geopolitically, especially in recent years, with tensions rising between the US and China. The idea of deepening trade ties with India made more sense than ever. India's massive consumer market, growing tech sector, and manufacturing potential are attractive, very attractive. But Washington also sees India as a market that's still too closed, too protective, and sometimes frustratingly unpredictable. So what did the US want out of this deal? In short, access. The US wanted India to lower tariffs on American goods, things like agricultural products, high-tech equipment, and medical devices. It also pushed hard for stronger intellectual property protections, especially for big pharma and US-based tech firms. Washington has long been critical of India's price controls on medical equipment and generic drugs, arguing that they hurt innovation and market access. Then there's digital trade, a hot-button issue. The US wanted looser rules on data storage and localization, but India's standing firm on keeping data within its borders, especially after repeated calls to secure its digital sovereignty. From Washington's view, these restrictions hurt US tech giants and complicate cross-border business. So while the US was coming to the table with the promise of stronger ties and potential economic benefits, its demands came with a catch. They would require India to make major policy shifts, and that's where things started to break down. For the US, this deal wasn't just about economics, it was also about setting the tone for future global standards, rules on trade, data, and IP that reflect American values. That's why they were pushing hard. But what Washington underestimated was how much India has changed in recent years. It's no longer the country that automatically says yes to Western proposals. It's calculating every move based on self-interest, global leverage, and long-term independence. In a way, the US treated this like a typical trade negotiation. India saw it as a test of sovereignty. That misalignment, not just in policies, but in mindset, is what brought the whole thing to a standstill. And that misread may cost Washington more than it expected. So where exactly did things fall apart? What were the deal breakers that pushed India to finally say thanks, but no thanks? It wasn't just one issue. It was a pile-up of unresolved disagreements that finally became too much to ignore. Let's start with agriculture. Always a sensitive subject for India. The US wanted greater access to Indian agricultural markets and fewer subsidies for local farmers. But that's a political landmine in India. Farming is not just an economic sector, it's a livelihood for hundreds of millions of people. Asking India to open the gates wider for foreign produce or reduce protections? That's never going to go down easy, especially in a pre-election climate where the government doesn't want to look like it's selling out its rural base. Then came the pharmaceutical industry. India is a global leader in generics, and the US has long been pushing for stricter patent protections to benefit big pharma. But from India's side, that threatens both public health and affordable access to medicine, not just at home, but across the developing world. It's not just a trade issue. It's a moral and political one. Digital trade was another flashpoint. The US wants data to flow freely across borders. India wants data stored locally. Why? Because data is the new oil, and India isn't interested in letting foreign companies control its digital infrastructure. The US sees localization as a barrier to business. India sees it as essential to national security and economic sovereignty. Tariffs also became a sticking point. The US pushed India to lower import duties on everything from electronics to wine and motorcycles. India, however, relies on those tariffs to protect domestic industries, especially as it's trying to build up its own manufacturing base under its Make in India vision. But beyond all the technicalities, here's the real issue: trust. Both sides entered talks hoping for a breakthrough, but unwilling to compromise on their red lines. The US came in with a list of demands. India responded with guarded patience, and as the list of unresolved points grew longer, the chances of a deal shrank. In the end, neither side blinked, and the deal collapsed under the weight of its own expectations. Now let's zoom out for a moment. Because trade deals don't happen in a vacuum. They're shaped by the political climate, national priorities, and who's up for re-election. And right now, both India and the US are in high-stakes political seasons. That matters a lot. On India's side, the Modi government is laser-focused on domestic image and electoral momentum. Nationalism is a big part of the political playbook, and being seen as tough on international negotiations plays very well at home. Walking away from a deal that could be portrayed as one-sided, that's not a diplomatic failure. It's a political win. It signals strength, sovereignty, and a refusal to bow to Western pressure, especially with rural voters and domestic industries in mind. Making any trade concession right now would have been risky. So from Delhi's point of view, standing firm wasn't just about policy, it was about preserving a narrative of India first. Now flip to Washington. The US administration, too, is heading into a tight election cycle. And trade is always a hot-button issue, especially with blue-collar voters, unions, and manufacturing-heavy states. Giving too many trade advantages to a foreign power, even a strategic partner like India, can trigger political backlash. On top of that, the US has been pushing to rebuild domestic industries, reshore supply chains, and reduce reliance on global imports. Cutting a deal that looked like it favored India more than American businesses? Not an easy sell back home. Then there's the China factor. Both India and the US are trying to balance competition with cooperation and trying not to look weak in front of Beijing. But that doesn't automatically mean they agree on everything. In fact, being on the same side strategically can sometimes increase friction, especially when both countries feel the need to assert leadership within their respective regions. And let's not forget allies and blocs. India's growing alignment with BRICS, the Global South, and regional trade alternatives plays into its decision-making. The US is still operating within Western economic frameworks that don't always resonate globally anymore. So when you stack elections, nationalism, rivalries, and alliances on top of the actual trade issues, it's no surprise this deal didn't survive. Politics, not policy, often calls the final shot. So, after all the back and forth, missed deadlines, closed-door meetings, and headlines, where does that leave us? What does India walking away from this trade deal with the US really mean? First, this moment is bigger than just a failed agreement. It's a reflection of a shifting world order, where emerging powers like India are no longer content playing by rules they didn't write. India is sending a clear message: if global powers want access, influence, or partnership, it won't come cheap, and it definitely won't come with conditions that threaten domestic interests or national pride. Second, this deal collapsing doesn't mean US-India ties are broken. Far from it. The strategic relationship between the two countries, especially on defense tech and countering China, remains strong. But what it does show is that economic alignment is a lot harder than strategic alignment. And unless both sides adapt their approach, these negotiations will keep hitting walls. Third, it's a wake-up call. For policymakers, yes, but also for businesses, investors, and even the average citizen. Because trade deals don't just shape GDP numbers, they influence job creation, market access, tech regulations, even the price of everyday goods. This walkaway? It'll have ripple effects in global markets, supply chains, and diplomatic priorities over the next year and beyond. And finally, here's the big takeaway. We're entering a new phase of globalization, one that's more fragmented, more politicized, and more complex. National interest is taking center stage, and big economies like India are no longer playing defense. They're setting the tone. Whether that results in better, fairer deals in the future or deeper divides depends on how the world responds. If you've stayed with us this far, you now understand the bigger picture, not just what happened, but why it matters. The headlines only scratch the surface. This story is about power, principle, and the price of saying no. So keep watching, keep questioning, and stay informed, because this is only the beginning.